I'd been planning this homecoming for weeks. 3 days early from my security consulting trip to Boston, just in time to surprise Emily and Sophie for the holidays. The snow was falling in those perfect, fat flakes that make everything look like a Christmas card, and our house glowed warm against the December twilight. I could see the living room lights through the front windows, casting golden rectangles across our pristine lawn. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Jake Callahan, 42 years old, coming home to what I thought was my perfect life. Emily would probably be in her usual spot on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees, working late again as the HR director at Pinnacle Tech. Sophie would be upstairs, headphones on, pretending to do homework while scrolling through social media. I pulled my rental car into the driveway, noting the unfamiliar BMW parked on the street, probably one of Emily's work friends. She'd been having more of those lately, especially since her promotion 6 months ago. I grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk and walked up the stone pathway we'd had installed last spring, back when we were still talking about renovating the kitchen together. The front door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning. Emily was obsessive about security, always lecturing Sophie and me about keeping doors locked. I stepped into the foyer, stomping snow off my boots onto the mat Emily had bought from some overpriced catalog. "Honey, I'm home," I called out, grinning at my own cliché. The sound echoed through the house differently than usual. Too many voices coming from the living room. Too much tension in the air. I walked toward the living room, my boots still damp on the hardwood floors. What I saw there stopped me cold in the doorway. Our living room looked like a corporate boardroom. Emily sat in her usual spot on the couch, but she wasn't alone. A man I recognized as Richard Sloan, her CEO, sat beside her, his arm draped casually across the back of the couch behind her shoulders. 2 people in expensive suits sat in our armchairs, briefcases open, papers spread across our coffee table like battle plans. But it was the family gathering that really caught my attention. Emily's parents, Lydia and Frank Morrison, sat stiffly on the love seat, their faces wearing identical expressions of righteous indignation. And there, curled up in the corner chair that had always been my reading spot, was Sophie. My 15-year-old daughter was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the papers on the table. "Oh, Jake," Emily's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She didn't sound surprised, she didn't sound guilty, she sounded relieved. "You're just in time to sign." Richard Sloan turned to look at me, and I saw something in his face that made my military training kick in. This wasn't a friendly visit, this was an ambush, carefully planned and perfectly executed. The BMW outside was his, the lawyers were his, even the timing was his. "Sign what?" I asked, though I was already putting the pieces together. The papers on the table, the lawyers, Emily's parents here for moral support, Sophie crying in the corner. "The divorce papers, Jake." Emily's voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used in her HR meetings when she was firing someone. "We've made this as simple as possible for you." I walked further into the room, noting how everyone was positioned. The lawyers flanked the coffee table like guards. Richard's hand had moved from the back of the couch to Emily's shoulder, a possessive gesture that was clearly meant for my benefit. Emily's parents watched me with the kind of cold satisfaction people get when they think they're about to witness justice being served. But it was Sophie who broke my heart. My daughter looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and whispered, "Daddy, I'm sorry. I didn't know they were going to do this." "Where do I sign?" I asked. The question seemed to surprise everyone except Sophie, who knew me well enough to recognize when I was thinking 3 moves ahead. Emily had expected anger, shouting, maybe even violence. Instead, I walked calmly to the coffee table and picked up the papers. Divorce petition, asset division, custody arrangements, child support calculations. Everything neatly typed and organized, ready for my signature. I skimmed through the documents, noting the details. Emily would keep the house. I'd get supervised visitation with Sophie every other weekend. I'd pay alimony and child support that would total about 70% of my income. "This is very thorough," I said, looking at the lawyers. "How long have you been working on this?" "Mr. Callahan," the female lawyer began, "we understand this is difficult, but Mrs. Callahan has made her decision clear. We're hoping to handle this amicably." I nodded and pulled a pen from my jacket pocket. The same pen I'd used to sign contracts worth millions of dollars in my security consulting business. The same pen I'd used to sign Sophie's school permission slips and birthday cards. "Jake," Emily said, and for the first time she sounded uncertain. "You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in months. Emily was 38, still beautiful in that sharp, professional way that had attracted me 15 years ago. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, even at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. She was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for her birthday, the one she'd said made her feel powerful. "I'm not making this hard," I said, signing my name with careful, deliberate strokes. "I'm making this easy." I signed every page that required my signature, initialed every paragraph they'd marked with little yellow sticky notes. The lawyers watched me with professional interest. Emily's parents watched with satisfaction. Richard watched with growing confidence. Sophie watched with growing alarm. When I finished, I set the pen down on the coffee table and smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic smile, but the genuine smile I used to give Emily when she'd accomplished something she was proud of. "There," I said. "All done." Emily stared at me, clearly unsettled by my calm reaction. "Jake, I want you to know this isn't personal. We've just grown apart, and I think it's better for everyone if we—" Richard's phone rang, cutting her off. The sound was jarring in the quiet room, some generic corporate ringtone that probably came pre-installed on his expensive device. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Richard Sloane. His voice was confident, the voice of a man who was used to being in control. But as he listened to whoever was on the other end, his face began to change. The color drained from his cheeks. His free hand gripped the arm of the couch. "What do you mean, frozen?" he said into the phone. "That's impossible. I just checked the accounts yesterday." Everyone in the room was watching him now. Emily's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching panic. The lawyers exchanged glances. Even Lydia and Frank looked worried. Richard hung up the phone and turned to stare at me. His face was pale, and there was something in his eyes I recognized from my military days. Fear. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" I stood up, straightening my jacket, and smiled at him the same way I'd smiled at Emily. Calm, professional, satisfied. "I signed the papers," I said. "Just like you wanted." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard was still staring at me like I'd just pulled a grenade pin with my teeth. Emily was looking back and forth between us, trying to understand what had just happened. The lawyers were shuffling papers nervously, sensing that their carefully orchestrated evening was about to go sideways. Sophie was the first to speak. "Daddy, what's happening?" I walked over to her chair and knelt down beside her, ignoring everyone else in the room. "Hey, kiddo, remember what I always tell you about bullies?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That they're only strong when you don't know they're coming?" "That's right." I brushed a tear from her cheek. "And what do you do when you know they're coming?" A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You get ready." "Smart girl." I kissed her forehead and stood up. "Why don't you go upstairs? I think the adults need to have a conversation." Sophie nodded and headed for the stairs, but she paused at the doorway and looked back. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. Better than fine." After Sophie disappeared upstairs, I turned back to face the room. Richard was frantically dialing someone on his phone. Emily was watching him with growing alarm. The lawyers looked like they were reconsidering their hourly rates. "Richard," Emily said. "What's wrong? Who was that on the phone?" He held up a finger, pressing the phone to his ear. "Come on, pick up," he muttered. Then, louder. "David, thank God! What the hell is happening with the accounts? What do you mean, federal investigation?" Emily's face went white. "Federal investigation?" I walked to the window and looked out at the snow, which was still falling in those perfect Christmas card flakes. "You know, Emily, I have to thank you for this evening. It's been very educational." "Jake, what are you talking about?" Her voice was sharp now, the professional composure cracking. "I'm talking about the fact that I've known about your affair with Richard for 4 months." I turned back to face the room. "I'm talking about the fact that I know about the money he's been skimming from Pinnacle Tech's pension fund. I'm talking about the fact that I know you've been helping him." The female lawyer cleared her throat. "Mr. Callahan, I think perhaps we should—" "Oh, we're way past should," I interrupted. "We're into consequences now." Richard finally hung up his phone. His face was gray, and his hands were shaking slightly. "The FBI has frozen all of Pinnacle Tech's accounts pending investigation into financial irregularities. They want to see me tomorrow morning." Emily stood up so fast she knocked over her wine glass. The red liquid spread across the white papers on the coffee table like blood. "That's impossible. You said the transfers were untraceable." "Emily," her mother said sharply. "What transfers?" I laughed, and the sound seemed to echo off the walls. Oh, this is perfect. Emily, you want to tell your parents about your new investment portfolio, or should I? Jake, please, Emily said, and for the first time in months, she sounded like the woman I'd married, scared and vulnerable and human. Let's talk about this privately. Privately? I shook my head. No, I think we're past private conversations. See, the thing about being a security consultant is that you learn how to investigate things. Financial irregularities, digital footprints, paper trails. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the Photos app. For instance, I learned that Richard here has been moving money from the company pension fund into a series of shell accounts. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones as he got more confident. Richard was staring at me like I was a snake that had just started talking. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. I scrolled through the photos on my phone. See, the beautiful thing about digital banking is that everything leaves a trail. Every transaction, every transfer, every login. And when you're sleeping with the HR director, well, she has access to all sorts of useful information, doesn't she? Emily sank back down onto the couch. Oh, God. The pension fund contributions, the employee information, the executive access codes. I looked at Richard. You couldn't have done this without inside help, and Emily, well, she was very helpful. Frank Morrison stood up, his face red with anger. What exactly are you accusing our daughter of? I'm not accusing her of anything, Frank. I'm stating facts. I scrolled to another photo. Like the fact that she's received over $50,000 in consulting fees from one of Richard's shell companies over the past 6 months. Consulting fees for what exactly? The male lawyer was frantically scribbling notes. Mr. Callahan, I need to advise you that anything you say here could be used in legal proceedings. Oh, I'm counting on it. I put my phone away and looked at Emily. You see, sweetheart, while you were planning your little ambush tonight, I was planning something too. I've been working with a friend of mine who used to be an FBI financial crimes investigator. We've been building a case. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Jake, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. It looks like embezzlement and conspiracy. It looks like you've been stealing from the retirement funds of people who trusted you. It looks like you've been planning to divorce me so you could run off with your boyfriend and his stolen money. Richard suddenly stood up, his face flushed with anger. You bastard! You think you're so smart. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I turned to face him, and something in my expression made him take a step back. Actually, Richard, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A small-time embezzler who got greedy and a woman who thought she could trade up. Jake, Emily said, please, think about Sophie. Think about our family. I am thinking about Sophie. I'm thinking about the fact that her college fund was in that pension account you've been raiding. I'm thinking about the fact that she's been watching her mother lie to her father for months. Lydia Morrison finally found her voice. Emily, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been involved in anything illegal. Emily looked at her mother, then at Richard, then at the lawyers, then finally at me. I could see her calculating, trying to find an angle, trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. It's not illegal, she said finally. Richard was moving the money to protect it. The company was having financial difficulties, and he was trying to safeguard the pension fund. I clapped slowly. Bravo. That's actually not bad. Except for the part where he moved it into accounts under false names and started spending it on BMW payments and expensive dinners. Richard's phone rang again. He looked at it like it was a poisonous snake, but answered anyway. Richard Sloane. His voice was shaky now. What? No, that's not... I can explain everything. He hung up and looked around the room like a trapped animal. They want to see me first thing in the morning. They have bank records, transaction logs, everything. The female lawyer stood up and started packing her briefcase. Mr. Sloane, I think you need criminal counsel, not divorce attorneys. Wait, Emily said. What about the divorce? I smiled at her. Oh, the divorce is still happening, Emily. In fact, it's going to be much more interesting than you planned. The next morning, I woke up in the guest bedroom of my friend Ben's house. Ben Kowalski had been my partner in the Army, and now he ran a small private investigation firm in town. He was also the friend I'd mentioned who used to work financial crimes for the FBI. Coffee's ready. Ben called from the kitchen as I stumbled downstairs. And you're going to want to see the morning news. I poured myself a cup and sat down at Ben's kitchen table. He handed me his tablet, which was open to the local news website. The headline made me smile. Local tech CEO arrested in pension fund scandal. They moved fast, I said. Federal Financial Crimes Task Force doesn't mess around, Ben replied. Once you gave them the evidence, it was just a matter of connecting the dots. The article was thorough. Richard Sloan, CEO of Pinnacle Tech, had been arrested at his home at 6 a.m. on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The FBI had seized his computers, his bank records, and his BMW. The article mentioned that other arrests were expected. "Other arrests?" I said. "Emily's going to have a very interesting day," Ben agreed. "The FBI will want to talk to her about those consulting payments." My phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message back on speaker. "Jake, please call me back. I need to talk to you. The FBI was here this morning asking questions about Richard and about money transfers. I told them I didn't know anything, but they want me to come in for an interview this afternoon. Jake, please, I'm scared." Ben raised an eyebrow. "She sounds scared." "She should be." I deleted the message. "What's the timeline looking like?" "Richard will probably try to make a deal. If he's smart, he'll try to minimize Emily's involvement in exchange for cooperation. If he's not smart, he'll try to blame everything on her." "Which do you think he'll choose?" Ben grinned. "Based on what you've told me about this guy, he'll throw her under the bus so fast it'll leave skid marks." My phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie. "Dad, can you pick me up from school? Mom is acting weird and I don't want to ride home with her." I texted back, "Of course, I'll be there at 3:30. "I need to go pick up Sophie," I told Ben. "How's she handling all this?" "Better than I expected. Sophie's always been good at seeing through people's bullshit. I think she knew something was wrong before I did." Ben nodded. "Kids usually do. They don't have all the emotional baggage that makes adults blind to the obvious." I finished my coffee and grabbed my jacket. "I'm going to take her out for dinner tonight, somewhere nice. She deserves a break from all this drama." "What about Emily? What about her?" "She's still Sophie's mother." I paused at the door. "Emily made her choices, Ben. She chose Richard over her family. She chose money over her daughter's college fund. She chose to lie and steal and cheat. Now she gets to live with the consequences." "No forgiveness? For what? For having an affair? For stealing money? For trying to ambush me with divorce papers in front of our daughter?" I shook my head. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. I drove to Sophie's school in my rental car, thinking about the conversation with Ben. He was right that Emily was still Sophie's mother, but he was wrong about forgiveness. Some betrayals were too deep, too calculated, too cruel to forgive. Sophie was waiting by the main entrance when I pulled up. She looked tired and older than her 15 years. When she got in the car, she didn't say anything for a long moment. "How bad is it, Dad?" "Pretty bad," I said honestly. "Your mom is probably going to be arrested." Sophie nodded like she'd been expecting that answer. "What happens to me?" "You come live with me. We'll figure out the rest as we go." "What about the house?" "The FBI will probably seize it as part of their investigation, but we'll find a new place. Maybe something smaller, but ours." Sophie was quiet for a few minutes as we drove through town. Finally, she said, "I knew something was wrong. Mom was acting different, staying out late, getting all these expensive clothes and jewelry, and she was mean to you all the time. You don't need to worry about any of that anymore." "Are you angry at her?" I thought about that question. "I was angry. Now I'm just disappointed. Your mom used to be a good person. I don't know what happened to her." "Richard happened to her," Sophie said quietly. "He made her think she deserved better than what she had." Out of the mouths of babes. My 15-year-old daughter had figured out in a few months what it had taken me years to understand. Emily hadn't just had an affair. She'd been seduced by the idea of a different life, a more expensive life, a life where she didn't have to worry about mortgage payments and college funds and all the mundane realities of middle-class existence. "Yeah, where do you want to go for dinner?" I asked. "That Italian place downtown? The one with the good breadsticks?" "Marcello's it is." We drove through the center of town, past the courthouse where Richard would probably be arraigned tomorrow, past the office building where Emily was probably meeting with FBI agents, past all the familiar landmarks of the life we used to have. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Callahan? This is Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. I was wondering if you could come in tomorrow morning to discuss your wife's involvement in the Pinnacle Tech investigation." "Of course," I said. "What time?" "Would 9 a.m. work for you?" "I'll be there." After I hung up, Sophie asked, "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," I said. "Everything I know about what your mother and Richard were doing." "Will that help her or hurt her?" I looked at my daughter, sitting there trying to navigate the impossible situation her mother had created. "Sophie, your mom made choices. Bad choices. The FBI doesn't care about my feelings or our family drama. They care about the law, and your mom broke it. I know, she said quietly. I just wish things could go back to the way they were. Me too, kiddo. But sometimes you can't go back. Sometimes you have to move forward and build something new. We pulled into the parking lot at Marcello's. It was early for dinner, so the restaurant was mostly empty. We got a quiet table in the back, and I watched Sophie twirl spaghetti around her fork like she'd done since she was little. Dad, she said between bites, are you going to be okay? I mean, financially and everything? I smiled at her. Sophie, I've been planning for this possibility for months. We're going to be fine. What do you mean, planning? I mean, I moved most of our money into accounts your mother couldn't access. I documented everything she and Richard were doing. I made sure we'd be protected when everything came out. Sophie looked impressed. You knew this was going to happen? I knew something was going to happen. Your mom was acting too suspicious, spending too much money, staying out too late. I started investigating, and once I found out about Richard and the embezzlement, I knew it was just a matter of time. So last night, when they ambushed you with the divorce papers, I was ready for it. In fact, I was counting on it. Sophie grinned for the first time all day. You set them up. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves, I corrected. They did the rest. My phone buzzed with another text from Emily. Jake, please, I need to see Sophie. Can we meet somewhere to talk? I showed the text to Sophie. What do you think? Sophie read it and shook her head. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. I'm still too angry at her. That's fair, I said, and deleted the message without responding. We finished dinner and drove back to Ben's house. Sophie had homework to do, and I had phone calls to make. My lawyer, my accountant, my business partners, everyone who needed to know that Jake Callahan was about to become a single father with a very messy divorce ahead of him. But as I watched Sophie settle in at Ben's kitchen table with her math homework, I realized I wasn't worried about the mess. I was looking forward to it. The FBI field office was a sterile, corporate building that could have housed an insurance company or a consulting firm. Agent Martinez met me in the lobby at exactly 9 a.m. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp, professional demeanor that reminded me of Emily before everything went wrong. Mr. Callahan, thank you for coming in. I know this must be a difficult time for you. Actually, Agent Martinez, I'm doing better than I have in months. She led me to a small conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device. Do you mind if we record this conversation? Not at all. I have nothing to hide. Agent Martinez started the recorder and stated the date, time, and participants for the record. Then she opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Mr. Callahan, we understand that you've been investigating your wife's relationship with Richard Sloan for several months. Can you walk me through what you discovered? I spent the next 2 hours laying out everything I'd found. The bank records showing transfers from Pinnacle Tech accounts to Richard's shell companies, the consulting payments to Emily that corresponded with her access to employee pension data, the timeline of their affair, and how it coincided with the escalation of the embezzlement. You've been very thorough, Agent Martinez said when I finished. This level of documentation is unusual for a civilian investigation. I'm a security consultant. This is what I do for a living. And you never confronted your wife about what you'd discovered? No, I wanted to see how far they'd go. Agent Martinez made a note. Were you aware that Mrs. Callahan has been telling people that you were abusive, that she was afraid of you? I felt a cold anger settle in my stomach. No, I wasn't aware of that. She's claiming that the money from Mr. Sloan was payment for consulting work she did to help other women in abusive relationships. She says she was planning to leave you because you were physically violent. I stared at Agent Martinez for a long moment. Agent Martinez, do you have children? I do. Then you'll understand why I'm about to ask you to investigate Emily's claims very carefully. My daughter Sophie has been living in our house for 15 years. If I were abusive, she would know. She would have seen evidence. She would have been affected by it. We plan to interview Sophie as part of our investigation. Good. You should also interview my neighbors, my business associates, my friends, anyone who's had regular contact with our family. You should look at medical records, police reports, any documentation that would support Emily's claims. Agent Martinez was taking notes. You seem very confident that we won't find any evidence of abuse. I'm confident because it never happened. Emily is trying to create a narrative that makes her look like a victim instead of a criminal. What about the consulting payments? Is it possible that Mrs. Callahan was genuinely providing services to Mr. Sloan's company? I laughed, and the sound was harsh in the small room. Agent Martinez, Emily is an HR director. She processes employee paperwork and handles benefits administration. What kind of consulting services could she possibly provide that would be worth $50,000? According to Mr. Sloan, she was helping him restructure the pension fund to make it more secure. By moving it into accounts under false names? By transferring money to shell companies in the Cayman Islands? That's not restructuring, Agent Martinez. That's theft. Agent Martinez closed her folder and turned off the recorder. Mr. Callahan, I have to ask, are you doing this because you're angry about the affair, or because you genuinely believe crimes were committed? I stood up and looked out the window at the parking lot below. I could see my rental car, the same car I'd driven home 2 nights ago to find my life blown apart in my own living room. Agent Martinez, if Emily had come to me 6 months ago and said she wanted a divorce, I would have been hurt, but I would have worked with her to make it as easy as possible for Sophie. If she'd told me she was having an affair, I would have been angry, but I would have gotten over it eventually. I turned back to face her. But she didn't do that. She chose to steal money from people who trusted her. She chose to help her boyfriend rob the retirement funds of working people who were counting on that money for their future. She chose to lie to our daughter and try to destroy my reputation with false abuse allegations. Agent Martinez nodded. So this is about justice, not revenge. No, I said. This is about consequences. Emily made choices, and now she gets to live with the results of those choices. I left the FBI office and drove to the Dewdrop Bar, a blue-collar place on the outskirts of town where I'd been going for years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and where reputations were made and destroyed over beer and whiskey. Ben was already there, sitting at our usual table in the back corner. He'd ordered me a bourbon, neat, which was exactly what I needed. "How'd it go with the FBI?" he asked. "They're building a solid case. Emily's trying to claim I was abusive and that she was just helping other abuse victims." Ben snorted. "Anyone who knows you would laugh at that." "That's what I'm counting on." I took a sip of bourbon and felt it burn down my throat. "What's the word around town?" "Richard's lawyer is trying to work out a plea deal. Word is he's going to claim that Emily was the mastermind and he was just following her lead." "Interesting strategy." "It won't work. The FBI has too much evidence showing that Richard initiated the transfers and Emily just provided access, but it might reduce his sentence." "What about Emily?" "She's hired Jack Morrison as her lawyer. No relation to her parents, despite the name. He's expensive and he's good, but he's got an uphill battle." I nodded. "Jack Morrison was known around town as the lawyer you hired when you were guilty but wanted to minimize the damage. The fact that Emily had chosen him told me everything I needed to know about her legal strategy." "Jake," a voice called from across the bar. I looked up to see Tommy Brennan, a guy I'd known since high school, walking over with a beer in his hand. "I heard about Emily and that CEO. Man, I'm sorry." "Thanks, Tommy." "But I got to say, I'm not surprised. Emily always thought she was too good for the rest of us. Remember how she acted at the high school reunion? Like she was doing us all a favor by showing up." Other people in the bar were starting to pay attention to our conversation. Small towns are like that. Personal drama becomes public entertainment very quickly. "I heard she was stealing money from the pension fund," said Maria Santos, the bartender. "My cousin works at Pinnacle Tech. She says people are talking about losing their retirement savings." "That's what the FBI is investigating," I said carefully. "Well, I hope they throw the book at both of them," Tommy said. "People work their whole lives for that pension money." More people gathered around our table. The story was spreading, getting embellished with each retelling. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Emily Callahan had been arrested for embezzling pension funds and cheating on her husband with her boss. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Dad, some kids at school are saying Mom got arrested. Is it true?" I texted back, "Not yet, but probably soon. Are you okay?" "Yeah. Can I stay at Ben's again tonight?" "Of course." Ben read the exchange over my shoulder. "She's handling this well. She's tougher than she looks. Gets it from her old man. Speaking of which, you might want to see this." Ben handed me his phone, which was open to Facebook. Emily had posted a long status update about how she was the victim of a vindictive husband and a corrupt investigation. The post was getting a lot of comments, most of them supportive from people who didn't know the full story. But there were a few that caught my attention, particularly one from Maya Rodriguez, Emily's best friend. "Emily, I think you need to tell the truth about what really happened. People deserve to know." I showed the comment to Ben. "Looks like Emily's support network is starting to crack." "Maya knows something." "Maya knows everything. Emily tells her everything. Always has." I finished my bourbon and stood up. "I think it's time I had a conversation with Maya." Ben grinned. This should be interesting. I drove across town to Maya's house, a modest ranch-style home in one of the older neighborhoods. Maya Rodriguez had been Emily's best friend since college, the kind of friend who knew all your secrets and kept them no matter what. Until now, apparently. Maya answered the door looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. "Jake," she said, and her voice was heavy with guilt. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Can we talk?" She stepped aside and let me into her living room. The space was cluttered with tissues and empty coffee cups, the debris of someone who'd been wrestling with a difficult decision. "Maya, what did you mean by your Facebook comment?" She sat down on her couch and buried her face in her hands. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I should have told you months ago, but Emily made me promise not to say anything." "What should you have told me?" "About Richard, about the money, about the plan." I sat down across from her and waited. Sometimes the best interrogation technique is simply staying quiet and letting people fill the silence. "Emily came to me in August," Maya said finally. She was excited about this new relationship with her boss. She said he was going to leave his wife and they were going to start a new life together. "What about the money?" She said Richard had found a way to protect the company's pension fund from economic instability. She said they were moving it to safer investments and that she was helping him by providing access to employee records. "And you believed that?" Maya looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I wanted to believe it. Emily was my best friend, and she seemed so happy. Happier than she'd been in years. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "Last month, when she started talking about the divorce. She said you'd been abusive, that she was afraid of you, that she needed to get out before you hurt her or Sophie." I felt that cold anger again, deeper this time. "Maya, in all the years you've known me, have you ever seen any evidence that I was abusive?" "No," she whispered. "Never. You've always been good to Emily, good to Sophie. That's why I started asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About the money, about Richard's plan, about why she was so sure you wouldn't fight the divorce." Maya wiped her eyes with a tissue. "She told me she had evidence of your abuse, but when I asked to see it, she said it was too painful to share." "There is no evidence, Maya, because it never happened. I know that now, and I know about the stolen money too. Emily called me yesterday, crying, begging me to tell the FBI that you were violent, that she was just trying to protect herself and Sophie." I leaned forward. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I wouldn't lie for her. Not about this. Not when people's retirement money is involved." Maya looked at me with something like relief. "Jake, I'm going to tell the FBI everything Emily told me. About Richard, about the money, about the fake abuse allegations. That's the right thing to do. Emily's going to hate me." "Emily made her choices, Maya. Now everyone else gets to make theirs." I left Maya's house feeling like another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Emily's support network was crumbling, her lies were being exposed, and the truth was finally coming to light. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning brought news that Richard Sloan had been denied bail. The judge had deemed him a flight risk, particularly after the FBI discovered that he'd been planning to transfer additional funds to offshore accounts. Emily, meanwhile, had been arrested at her office and was scheduled for arraignment that afternoon. I was getting ready to pick up Sophie from school when my phone rang. It was Jack Morrison, Emily's lawyer. "Mr. Callahan, I was hoping we could have a conversation about your wife's case." "I'm listening." "My client is willing to provide full cooperation with the FBI investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Part of that cooperation would involve testifying against Mr. Sloan." "What does that have to do with me?" "Mrs. Callahan is also prepared to admit that her allegations of abuse were exaggerated. She's willing to agree to joint custody and a fair division of assets." I almost laughed. "Mr. Morrison, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Emily is willing to admit she lied about me being abusive, and in exchange, she wants me to help her get a lighter sentence for embezzling money?" "Mr. Callahan, I think you should consider what's best for your daughter. A lengthy trial and prison sentence for her mother would be traumatic for Sophie." "You know what's traumatic for Sophie, Mr. Morrison? Finding out that her mother is a thief and a liar who was willing to destroy her father's reputation to cover up her crimes. My client made some poor choices, but she's not a criminal mastermind. She was manipulated by Mr. Sloan. Your client helped steal retirement money from working families. She falsely accused me of abuse. She tried to ambush me with divorce papers in front of our daughter. Those aren't poor choices, Mr. Morrison. Those are crimes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Callahan, what would it take for you to support a plea agreement?" I thought about that question. What would it take? What did I really want from this situation? Full restitution to the pension fund, I said finally. A public apology for the false abuse allegations, and Emily gives up any claim to alimony or shared custody. That's quite harsh. Mr. Morrison, your client tried to destroy my life to cover up her crimes. I think I'm being generous by not pushing for the maximum sentence. I'll discuss this with my client and get back to you. After I hung up, I called Ben. Emily's lawyer just offered me a deal. What kind of deal? She admits the abuse allegations were false, cooperates against Richard, and I support a plea agreement. What did you tell him? That she can have a plea deal when she makes full restitution and gives up custody of Sophie. Ben whistled. That's going to be expensive. The pension fund is missing over $2 million. Emily should have thought about that before she decided to steal it. I picked up Sophie from school and took her to lunch at a small cafe downtown. She seemed more relaxed than she had in days, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Dad, I've been thinking about what you said about consequences. What about it? I understand why you can't forgive Mom. She didn't just hurt you, she hurt a lot of people. The workers at Pinnacle Tech, me, even herself. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sophie, you don't have to choose sides in this. Emily is still your mother. I know, but I also know right from wrong, and what she did was wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Emily. Please let me see Sophie. I'm her mother and I love her. I showed the text to Sophie. What do you think? Sophie read it and shook her head. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet. That's your choice to make. Dad, what's going to happen to her? She'll probably go to prison for a few years. After that, she'll have to rebuild her life. Will she be able to do that? I thought about Emily, the woman I'd married 16 years ago. She'd been ambitious then, but also kind. She'd been driven, but also ethical. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost those qualities. Or maybe they'd been buried under years of resentment and entitlement. I don't know, Sophie. That's up to her. That evening, Ben and I went back to the Dewdrop Bar. The place was more crowded than usual, and I could feel people watching me as we walked to our table. The story of Emily and Richard had become the biggest news in town, and everyone wanted to hear the details from someone who was close to the situation. Jake, Tommy Brennan called out again. I heard Emily got arrested today. That's what I heard too, I said noncommittally. My wife works at the courthouse, said another man I didn't recognize. She said Emily was crying during the arraignment, claiming she was innocent. They all claim they're innocent, Maria the bartender said, until the evidence comes out. I was halfway through my first bourbon when Maya Rodriguez walked into the bar. She looked around nervously until she spotted me, then walked over to our table. Jake, can I talk to you for a minute? Sure. Maya sat down and ordered a wine from Maria. Her hands were shaking slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips. I met with the FBI this afternoon, she said. I told them everything Emily had told me over the past few months. How did that go? They were very interested in the timeline, especially the part about Emily planning the divorce and the abuse allegations at the same time she was helping Richard move the money. I nodded. That shows premeditation. Jake, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you yesterday. I waited. Emily asked me to lie for her. Not just about the abuse, but about the money, too. She wanted me to tell the FBI that she'd confided in me about being afraid of Richard, that she was being coerced into helping him. What did you tell the FBI? The truth. That Emily was excited about the relationship, that she talked about Richard like he was her ticket to a better life. Maya finished her wine in one gulp and signaled Maria for another. Jake, I'm scared. Emily called me after she was released on bail. She was furious that I'd talked to the FBI. She said I'd betrayed her, that I'd ruined her life. Emily ruined her own life, Maya. I know that, but she doesn't see it that way. She blames you, she blames the FBI, she blames me. Everyone except herself. I thought about that. Emily had always had trouble accepting responsibility for her mistakes. When she'd gotten a speeding ticket, it was because the speed limit was too low. When our marriage started having problems, it was because I didn't appreciate her enough. Maya, are you worried that Emily might try to retaliate against you? I don't know. Maybe. She sounded desperate on the phone, like she was willing to do anything to avoid going to prison. Ben leaned forward. Maya, if you're concerned about your safety, you should talk to the FBI. They can provide protection for witnesses. I just want this to be over, Maya said. I want Emily to accept responsibility and serve her time and move on with her life. That's not going to happen, I said. Emily doesn't think she did anything wrong. In her mind, she's the victim here. My phone rang. Jack Morrison again. Mr. Callahan, I've discussed your terms with my client. She's willing to make full restitution and issue a public apology, but she won't give up her parental rights. Then there's no deal. Mr. Callahan, please be reasonable. Sophie needs her mother. Sophie needs a mother who isn't a convicted felon. Sophie needs a mother who didn't try to destroy her father's reputation with false allegations. Sophie needs a mother who puts her daughter's welfare ahead of her own selfish desires. My client loves her daughter. Your client stole her daughter's college fund to finance an affair with her boss. That's not love, Mr. Morrison. That's selfishness. I hung up and looked at Maya and Ben. Emily's still trying to negotiate. What did you tell them? Ben asked. The same thing I told them before. Full restitution, public apology, and she gives up custody. Maya shook her head. She'll never agree to give up Sophie. Then she'll go to prison for the maximum sentence. Jake, Maya said quietly, I know you're angry. I know Emily hurt you badly. But Sophie is going to need her mother eventually. I looked at Maya for a long moment. Maya, let me ask you something. If Emily had succeeded in her plan, if she'd divorced me and run off with Richard and the stolen money, what do you think would have happened to Sophie? Maya didn't answer. Sophie would have been left with a father who'd been falsely accused of abuse and a mother who'd stolen her college fund. Emily wasn't thinking about Sophie when she made her choices. She was thinking about herself. I finished my bourbon and stood up. Emily made her bed, Maya. Now she gets to lie in it. 3 weeks later, I sat in the courthouse watching Emily's sentencing hearing. She'd finally accepted a plea deal, but not the one her lawyer had proposed to me. The federal prosecutor had offered her 8 years in exchange for full cooperation against Richard and complete restitution to the pension fund. Emily stood before the judge wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled, her perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, as if the weight of her choices had physically compressed her. Mrs. Callahan, the judge said, before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say? Emily looked around the courtroom. Her parents sat in the front row, their faces masks of shame and disappointment. Maya sat a few rows back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophie had chosen not to come, saying she wasn't ready to see her mother like this. Your Honor, Emily said, her voice barely audible. I want to apologize to the employees of Pinnacle Tech whose retirement funds I helped steal. I want to apologize to my daughter, who didn't deserve to have her life turned upside down by my poor choices. She paused and looked directly at me. And I want to apologize to my husband, Jake, for the lies I told about him. He never abused me. He never hurt me or Sophie. I made those allegations because I was desperate and scared. But that doesn't excuse what I did. The judge nodded. Mrs. Callahan, the court accepts your plea and finds you guilty of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and embezzlement. You are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Emily's shoulders sagged, and she began to cry silently as the bailiff led her away. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I'd expected this and had prepared a brief statement. My daughter and I are grateful that justice has been served, I said into the microphones. We hope that the employees of Pinnacle Tech will be able to recover their retirement funds and that this case serves as a warning to others who might be tempted to abuse positions of trust. Mr. Callahan, one reporter called out, do you have any message for your wife? I thought about that question. Did I have a message for Emily? After everything she'd put us through, after all the lies and betrayals and calculated cruelty, what could I possibly say to her? I hope she uses her time in prison to reflect on the choices that led her here, I said finally. And I hope she finds a way to become the person Sophie deserves to have as a mother. That evening, Sophie and I had dinner at our new apartment. It was smaller than the house we'd lost to the FBI asset forfeiture, but it was ours. Sophie had decorated her room with posters and photos, making it feel like home. Dad, she said over dessert, do you think Mom will really serve 8 years? Probably 6 or 7 with good behavior. That's a long time. It is. Sophie was quiet for a moment, picking at her ice cream. Do you think she'll be different when she gets out? I considered the question carefully. I don't know, Sophie. Prison changes people, but it doesn't necessarily make them better. That's a choice Emily will have to make for herself. I wrote her a letter, Sophie said suddenly. Oh? I haven't sent it yet. I'm not sure I should. What does it say? That I love her, but I'm disappointed in her. That I hope she learns from her mistakes and becomes a better person. That I'll consider having a relationship with her when she gets out. But only if she proves she's changed. I reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. That sounds like a very mature letter. Should I send it? That's up to you. But if you do decide to send it, I think it might help her understand what she needs to do to earn your forgiveness. Sophie nodded and went back to her ice cream. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd survived a storm and were learning to rebuild their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Ben. Richard got 12 years, thought you'd want to know. I showed the message to Sophie. Richard got a longer sentence than Mom. Good, she said firmly. He was the one who started all this. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I sat on the couch in our small living room and thought about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been living in a big house with a wife I thought I knew and a daughter I was trying to protect from the truth about her mother. Now I was living in a modest apartment with a daughter who'd proven to be stronger and wiser than I'd ever imagined, and an ex-wife who was beginning an 8-year prison sentence. Was I satisfied with how things had turned out? Emily was in prison, Richard was in prison, the stolen money would be returned to the pension fund, and Sophie and I were free to build a new life together. Justice had been served, consequences had been faced, and the truth had finally come to light. But satisfaction wasn't the right word for what I felt. Relief, maybe. Vindication, certainly. But not satisfaction, because satisfaction implied that I'd gotten something I wanted, and what I'd really wanted was for none of this to have happened at all. I'd wanted Emily to be the woman I'd married, the woman who would never have stolen money or lied about abuse or tried to destroy her family for the sake of a better lifestyle. I'd wanted Sophie to grow up with two parents who loved her and each other. I'd wanted our biggest problems to be things like college tuition and home repairs and whether to take a vacation in the mountains or at the beach. But those weren't the choices I'd been given. I'd been given the choice between enabling Emily's crimes or exposing them, between protecting her lies or revealing the truth, between letting her destroy our family or fighting to save what could be saved. I'd made my choices, and I could live with the consequences. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maya. Jake, I just wanted to call and thank you. Thank me for what? For doing the right thing? For not letting Emily get away with what she did? For protecting Sophie and all those people whose retirement money was stolen? Maya, you did the right thing too. It took courage to tell the FBI the truth. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't investigated, if you hadn't gathered all that evidence. Emily and Richard might have gotten away with it. Someone would have caught them eventually. People like that always get greedy, and greed makes you careless. Maybe, but it might have been too late for the pension fund, too late for Sophie, too late for a lot of people. After Maya hung up, I walked to Sophie's room and looked in on her. She was asleep, her face peaceful in the glow of her bedside lamp. Tomorrow she'd wake up and go to school and hang out with her friends and do her homework and live the normal life of a 15-year-old girl. She'd do all of that without having to worry about her mother's lies or her father's reputation or whether her college fund had been stolen by criminals. She'd do it knowing that the truth had been told, that justice had been served, and that the people who'd tried to hurt her family had been held accountable for their actions. That was worth 8 years of Emily's life. That was worth the loss of our house and our old life and whatever dreams Emily had harbored about running away with Richard and his stolen money. That was worth everything. I turned off Sophie's lamp and closed her door quietly. Then I went to my own room, where I slept better than I had in months, knowing that the long nightmare was finally over. 3 months later, I received a letter from Emily. It was written on prison stationery in her careful handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and love notes during the early years of our marriage. Jake, the letter began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. I was selfish and greedy and cruel, and I hurt everyone who mattered to me because I thought I deserved a different life than the one I had. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I realize now that the life I had with you and Sophie was everything I should have wanted. We had a good marriage, a beautiful daughter, a comfortable home, and a future full of possibilities. I threw all of that away for money and excitement and the fantasy of being someone I'm not. I know Sophie wrote to me, and I know she said she might consider having a relationship with me when I get out, but only if I prove I've changed. I want you to know that I'm going to spend every day of the next 8 years trying to become worthy of that chance. I'm taking classes here, working on my GED since I never finished college properly. I'm seeing a counselor who's helping me understand why I made the choices I did. I'm trying to become the person Sophie deserves to have as a mother, even if it takes the rest of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jake. What I did to you was unforgivable, but I hope someday you'll be able to tell Sophie that her mother learned from her mistakes and became a better person because of them. Thank you for protecting our daughter when I failed to do so. Thank you for making sure the truth came out, even though it destroyed our family. Thank you for being the man I always knew you were, even when I was trying to convince the world you were someone else. I hope you and Sophie are happy in your new life. You both deserve all the happiness in the world. Emily. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of my desk. Someday, when Sophie was older, I might show it to her. Or maybe I wouldn't. That would be her choice to make, just like everything else about her relationship with her mother. For now, it was enough to know that Emily was finally taking responsibility for her actions. It was enough to know that she understood what she'd lost and why she'd lost it. It was enough to know that she was trying to become a better person, even if it was 8 years too late. Sophie and I had built a good life together in our small apartment. She was doing well in school, making new friends, talking about college and careers and all the dreams that 15-year-old girls have. She mentioned her mother sometimes, usually to ask how long it would be before she was released or whether I thought she was really changing. I always gave her honest answers because Sophie deserved the truth, even when the truth was complicated or painful. She'd had enough lies in her life. From now on, she would get nothing but honesty from the people who claimed to love her. On the first anniversary of Emily's sentencing, Sophie and I went out for dinner at Marcello's, the same restaurant where we'd eat in the night after her mother's arrest. Sophie ordered the same spaghetti she'd had that night, and I ordered the same chicken parmesan. "Dad," she said over dessert, "do you ever regret what happened?" "What do you mean?" "Do you ever wish you hadn't investigated Mom? That you just let her leave quietly instead of exposing everything?" I thought about that question, the same question I'd been asking myself for a year. "Sophie, if I'd let your mother leave quietly, she would have taken $2 million that belonged to other people, families would have lost their retirement savings, your college fund would have been gone, and you would have grown up believing that your father was an abusive man who drove your mother away." Sophie nodded slowly. "So you had to do it." "I had to do it, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the right thing to do." "I'm proud of you, Dad." "I'm proud of you too, kiddo. You handled all of this with more grace and maturity than most adults would have shown." Sophie smiled, and in that smile, I saw the future. College applications and graduation ceremonies and wedding days and grandchildren and all the milestones that make life worth living. I saw a young woman who would grow up knowing the difference between right and wrong, who would never compromise her integrity for money or excitement or the promise of an easier life. I saw Emily's daughter, but also my daughter, shaped by both of our influences, but ultimately her own person, making her own choices and living with her own consequences. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed like I'd done when she was little, she asked me one more question. "Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. Would that bother you?" "No. I think you deserve to be happy. And I think you deserve someone who appreciates what a good man you are." I kissed her forehead and turned out the light. "I love you, Sophie." "I love you too, Dad." I closed her door and walked to the living room, where I sat in my chair and looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Emily was lying in a prison cell, hopefully thinking about the choices that had brought her there. Somewhere out there, Richard was doing the same thing. But here, in this small apartment, Sophie and I were safe and happy and free. We'd survived the storm that Emily and Richard had created, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. Justice had been served. The truth had been told. The consequences had been faced.